Hello, I'm back. How is this working? I'm seeing problematic com- comments. I can tell you that this is literally it's a new computer. It's very good. I mean, I don't remember the specs off the top of my head. Internet, I've got over 900 megabytes per second download speed, 30 megabytes per second upload speed. I just did a test, so I'm confused. It's using the Ethernet. I have no idea what the problem is. This is so annoying. Oh boy. I'm streaming in a lower I've already put it in a lower quality. Um, oh man, I don't know what the issue is here. What's weird is it wasn't that bad last time. I mean, there were problems with the audio, but it seemed like it was okay. Is this working? Is it working? It's working. It's working. Oh, that's so good to hear. Okay, well, I hope it just continues to work for now. I'm so sorry about that, guys. I'm glad that some of you came back. Uh, well, this is really, I'm just going to need to spend some time doing some testing on my own. No more buffers? Seems better now. Okay, I will continue and, well, I will get started as if there are no issues and hopefully everything goes well. So, and now of course I turned the stream quality down so all the things that I was going to put on screen are the wrong size because I don't know how to make that work properly. So, okay, let me say a couple things. So first of all, I uploaded my structure of reality video, and I was thinking that in my mind that was going to be like the last thing I was going to talk about for a while. Also, I can't see the chat anymore. Oh, why is it on its side? Jesus Christ. Give me 1 second here. Let me just rotate this. Wrong way. Rotate 180 degrees. There we go. Okay, and hopefully there's a little bit less latency with the chat. Okay, I honestly I didn't even touch that. I don't know why that flipped on its side. Okay, so yeah, I uploaded the structure of reality video, and at the time I was thinking that would probably be the last thing that I uploaded about Elden Ring for a while because I don't know, that just kind of was an overall sense of the story and the things that I was thinking about, and then of course like give it 2 weeks and I start thinking about some other things. I'm thinking about the Glowmite Queen and America and death and how that all works, and now I'm so then I got to thinking, okay, maybe I can make a video on how America, I believe, is the Glowmite Queen. And then I started thinking about how that would work, and then I realized that okay, now this has to get into a bunch of other things, um, and oh no, it's all dead again. That's not good. I'm just going to continue for now, and hopefully everything's working. So I just started thinking about a bunch of other things, and that is what I want to address now. Okay, I'm seeing mixed messages. I'm hoping that everything is working. So to anyone who's just joined, the stream is having issues. I am a technical idiot. I don't know anything about how this works, and there may be issues. So sorry about that. If you're not having issues, that's great. So let me scroll over to this thing and make sure that it is. Wait. What? What the heck? No, 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 no. This is what I'm going to. Sorry, guys. I spent actually quite a bit of time setting everything up, and then I just don't know enough to be able to quickly do things on the fly. So just please, is this what I want? No, I want stretch. No, definitely not that. Oh my God, this is getting worse. This is seriously a problem. Seriously a problem. I really need to fix this. Okay. Well, we'll just move this over here for now. I think this should work. I apologize for my technical stupidity. Okay, so this is the first question. What does Destined Death do? This is the one that I have been trying to think about, because if you look at the plot of Elden Ring, there are essentially, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 major events, like monuments in the story. So one of those is obviously the arrival of the Elden Ring, if you interpret it that way. One of those is the removal of Destined Death from the Elden Ring, the creation of the Golden Order, and one of those is the shattering of the Elden Ring. Those are sort of the 3 main things in terms of things that are related to the Elden Ring, things that could have a major metaphysical impact on the world, on the structure of reality. Those are the 3 big events. I'm struggling to think of anything else. I mean, the Night of the Black Knives is a major event in the narrative, but not necessarily in a way that affects the overall conditions of the world. Let me try something else here. Maybe that's the problem. I'm honestly really trying to hopefully that might be a bit better for people. It's not super zoomed in. So in terms of major events that affect, I don't know, the metaphysics of the world, those are the 3 big events. Now, the arrival of the Elden Beast is a little bit complicated because, first of all, you could interpret it to say that the Elden Ring existed before that, or some kind of thing like the Elden Ring. Clearly, like, reality existed, so whatever the scope of the Elden Ring's powers, it's something that was instantiated after the world already exists and was already I don't know, working. There's a question of, did death exist before the Elden Ring arrived? This is all sort of confusing and ambiguous. And did the Elden Beast turn into the Elden Ring, or was it like always the Elden Ring? When it arrived, was it the Elden Ring at the same time as being the Elden Beast? Because it says it became the Elden Ring, so that's kind of confusing. The shattering is a little bit clearer in some ways, because we know at least that it led to the shattering, capital S shattering, and that is a little bit more connected with the demigods and all the events that are a little bit more proximal to where we begin. I'm sorry. I'm getting distracted because I'm seeing all these comments about how the stream is having problems. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm just going to go forward and, hopefully the audio is coming through. So even if you can't see anything, I'm going to say what I'm talking about, and hopefully that works. So with those 2 events are a little bit confusing, or a little bit I don't know, they've already been addressed in lots of different ways, or they're too ambiguous to address. So the real one is the removal of the Destined Death, the removal of the Rune of Death from the okay, even right there we already have a problem, because the issue is that Enya says the Rune of Death was plucked from the Golden Order upon its inception. I think that's the line. Yeah, the Forbidden Shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation, which presumably means that she's referring to the Elden Ring, but it's a little weird that she calls it the Golden Order, because it wouldn't have been the Golden Order if Destined Death was in the Elden Ring, because the Golden Order was created. It's a kind of like self-contradictory line, but presumably we can just assume that she really means it was plucked from the Elden Ring upon the creation of the Golden Order. I guess you could argue that, but I don't really have a counterfactual there, so I don't know. Clearly, there's something going on with death in Elden Ring, to state the obvious, and that means, you know, whatever, both death and fate, and this is what Destined Death is connected to. So figuring out what Destined Death actually does, like the mechanics of what's going on, is I think pretty important. So Last Protagonist says, if the Rune of Death is in the ER, how did it get in? And that brings up another point, because when the Elden Ring was sent into the Lands Between as the Elden Beast, if the Rune of Death was already in that, then it means that the Greater Will isn't opposed to Destined Death. Yeah, well, I forgot about that. Yeah, thank you, Bilbo Baggins, for bringing that up. The star was bearing the beast, which later became the ring. Well, actually, so the line is... oops, why is that not working? What? Why is that not switching it up? What is it? The Greater Will... There we go, that was it. It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the Lands Between, which would later become the Elden Ring. Well, the thing is, that is actually grammatically ambiguous. Like, there is... in terms of grammar, there is a common practice, but there is no hard rule which determines how these non-restrictive clauses work. This which would later become the Elden Ring. So the word which here, the common practice is just to have it refer to the previous, the closest noun, which would actually mean the Lands Between in this case. Sent a golden star bearing a beast into the Lands Between, which would later become the Elden Ring. The Lands Between would later become the Elden Ring. Now, most people don't interpret it that way because that makes not a lot of sense, although it could make sense in some ways. So most people kind of go back to the next one, which is beast. A golden star bearing a beast into the Lands Between, which would later become the Elden Ring. But also you could say that it sent a golden star bearing a beast into the Lands Between, which would later become the Elden Ring, meaning that the star is the which thing that would become the Elden Ring. So there is actually no grammatical hard rule here. And from what I remember of the Japanese, I don't think it's any clearer. Well, Last Protagonist is in chat. He could probably confirm or deny that to me. I think it just uses like sorega, so it's just sort of saying, yeah, that thing would later become the Elden Ring. So from what I remember, it's pretty vague as well. Anyway, so that brings us to Destined Death, because this might be it's one of the key figures in the metaphysical structure of the world and what's going on and why things, and it's also, there's a question of, you know, especially when you look at Miyazaki's games in the past, there's always something wrong with the world, right? It's always like, okay, there's a natural order to things, and the natural order has been in some way disturbed. There's a wrongness with the world that you don't immediately understand. You're sort of put into this world, and it's always after things have gone wrong, and there is something that you have to figure out, and maybe even there's layers to that. There's like a layer of this is the obvious wrong thing, and then beneath that there's sort of a deeper wrong thing. I mean, Bloodborne, for example, like, okay, people are turning into beasts, but then this sort of deeper wrong thing of crazy Lovecraftian beings and whatnot. So in terms of figuring out what the wrongness is, oh, thank you, Bill, for posting the Japanese description in the chat. Yeah, see, それがエルデンリング. I'd have to look at that more closely to remember. Sent the beast. Yeah. I think that would mean the beast is what's implied there. So in terms of figuring out what that wrongness with the world is, it seems like Destined Death is a pretty good candidate. Because, okay, clearly Shattering the Ring has led to some wrongness, and the Night of the Black Knives has led to some wrongness as well, but that's also tied back into the Rune of Death, because that all happened because a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen. So, we go on to, what does Destined Death do? Like, what is it actually about? Okay, well, this means inevitable death, right? Destined Death, it isn't just any old death, it's a destined death. It's the death that has to happen, right? So, and I think the Japanese is like, I can't remember the word, it's fate, it's like the death of fate, right? It's the type of death that's belonging to the category of fate. Of all the types of death, this is a fate's death. So what type of death is fated death? Well, it means inevitable death. And for who? Is it inevitable death for everyone? Or is it just for demigods? Or is it for gods? Or a single god, even? And there's a reason that I'm sort of making that point here. So this is a dialogue from the finger reader crone in where is it? In the nameless eternal city. And she says, "My poor sweet lordling should have died a true death, as the first of the demigods to die, as a martyr to destined death." So the oh, thank you, Spencer. I really appreciate that. Your last video is probably my favorite Elden Ring lore video, especially the section on time with Radagon and the first Elden Lord Placiduce X. Even if there isn't a ton of proof in game, I've adopted it into my headcanon. That's awesome. Well, we'll see if any of this is borne out by the DLC, because Miyazaki's probably going to throw everything up in the air anyway. So this dialogue from this finger reader crone, she says that she's saying about Godwyn that he should have died a true death. And there's also that line, where is it from? In the golden, what is it? The golden epitaph sword. That's presumably referencing Mikola, where it has this quote that says, "Oh brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." So there's something about like what should have happened is that Godwyn fully died as a martyr to destined death. And that's really weird. I mean, I don't know that anyone's really talked about this that much. But the idea that he should have died, as in there was some plan or maybe a fate for him to die. But instead what happened was that Ronnie killed her body at the same time. And so it like split this effect. Right? Because the idea is that Godwyn was killed by the Black Knife assassins. But Ronnie went up on some divine tower and carved this thing into her flesh. And there's no evidence that anybody else knew about that besides Ronnie. Now, it may not even be the Black Knife assassins that knew that. Could just be that Ronnie did this all in secret by herself. She was involved. She stole the fragment of death for the assassination of Godwyn, and had this, and she was part of all this plan. Maybe America was involved as well. Who knows? But in secret. I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm just saying that it could be this way because there's no evidence otherwise that she killed her body at the same time, which disrupted this plan. The plan, perhaps not Ronnie's plan, but the plan was that Godwyn was supposed to die. You could say that maybe he was destined to die. So, was that America's plan? Was that the Greater Will's plan? Oh, goddamn. Let me go back. So, it does seem like the fact that the cinematic trailer says, America was driven to the brink, essentially meaning that, she was upset at Godwyn's half-death, let's say, could indicate that she was upset. See, it could indicate that America was upset about his death at all, or it could indicate that she was upset about the fact that he only half died, that he didn't fully die, that was what he was supposed to do. So that's the first question, is like what's going on there. The second question is Erdtree burial, because let's say, okay, what is destined death for? Who does it govern? Is it for everyone? That's sort of the default assumption that I think a lot of people have made. But then the question is, well, why are people buried? Right? That would presume that there is death, that people die, right? Unless you're burying them alive, which I suppose is possible. But it's I don't know, that isn't indicated, right? It's I guess there's not necessarily a contraindication there, but you would assume that if people were buried alive, there would be something to suggest that. So it kind of suggests that people did die, and this would have happened under the Golden Order. So that would suggest that destined death, the removal of destined death from the Elden Ring, didn't stop some people from dying, and therefore it means that destined death doesn't really have to do with everyone's fated death, or else they shouldn't have died. Now, you could also argue it this way, that destined death is purely about fated death, so you can die in other ways. This is just about your fated death. So let's say if you're killed. So it's possible that that's also part of it, because that also plays into the whole thing with struggle, and perhaps like the Deathrite cult, the Helfin idea of, if you die in battle, this is somehow different than if you just die, let's say, of old age. I'm putting that in as I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's the idea, that there's something different about dying in battle. So it could be to do with that. But there is a question, why bury people at the roots of the Erdtree? Why feed them back into this system if destined death is gone? And why only some people? Because it's given status, right? It's only, what is it? Banished Knight Oleg, I think. Where would that be? Items, I suppose. Oleg. Yeah, one of the two knights known as the Wings of the Storm. After his banishment, he attracted the notice of the grace-given Lord, and later, having slain 100 traitors as the Lord's hand, Oleg earned the hero's honor of Erdtree burial. So it's a hero's honor, right? So that could also play into the idea of that it's like death in battle, or death in, I don't know, in defense of the Erdtree, in defense of the Greater Will. So that's another big question. And then I'm just going to finish up this section here, and then I'm going to read some comments and get your guys' input on this. So then here's the third point is the only tangible effect that we get from unleashing Destined Death after we beat Malekith is that the Giant's Flame burning the Erd Tree is stoked enough to burn the thorns, which guard a weird shiny light that teleports you inside where Marika/Radagon is. Right? So when we unleash Destined Death, we don't get it. We don't like acquire it in the way that we acquire a Great Rune. We don't get any special powers. We don't get the power to suddenly kill people in a different way. We don't get any power over, Death Flame or Black Flame or anything like this. None of the enemy deaths change in any way, right? So the people that were, the normal enemies in the game, they die and revive in the same way. The bosses in the game die and permanently die. None of that changes, and you can argue about how much of that is actually gameplay concession versus some kind of narrative context. But the point is that it doesn't actually do anything to the world, except that it stokes the fires of the Erd Tree, and that's kind of weird. Now there's some questions about okay, could you, if you were to get inside the Erd Tree, if it were possible, and we don't know if it's possible or not, if you were to be able to get inside the Erd Tree without unleashing Destined Death, would you not be able to kill the Elden Beast if you hadn't unleashed Destined Death? So that's a question. Maybe it has some effect there. There is also the question that, Hugh is crafting a weapon to kill a god. But, and this has to do with presumably upgrading a weapon high enough that it has one of these ancient dragon smithing stones which can lightly twist time, which is capable of slaying a god. But that has nothing to do, as far as we can tell, with Destined Death. So, apparently there's another way of killing gods besides Destined Death. And we know that Destined Death can, in some way, has some kind of god-killing power because... Did I not put it in here? Because the Black Flame could once slay gods. But when Malekith sealed Destined Death, the true power of the Black Flame was lost, implying that now it can't slay gods, and it only could slay gods because Destined Death was not sealed. Now, that still doesn't quite make sense, because once we unseal Destined Death, Black Flame doesn't change in any way. So, not sure what's going on there. So here's the questions. Is Destined Death specifically about the Erd Tree? Because that is what happens. I mean, if we just look at it from a practical point of view, what happens when you unleash it is that the Erd Tree burns more. And then that opens up the question, was the Giant's Flame originally imbued with Destined Death? Because Destined Death doesn't set the Erd Tree on fire. It stokes the Giant's Flame, which is already there. As if, it's a part of the Giant's Flame, or it's enhancing the Giant's Flame, which would beg the question, before Destined Death was sealed, was the Giant's Flame imbued with Destined Death? And then there's the question of, if the Black Flame was originally imbued with Destined Death, was it also the same as the Giant's Flame if the Giant's Flame was also imbued with Destined Death? And that would also open up the question, was the Glowmite Queen a giant or someone affiliated with the giants or the Fell God? So, this is the first set of questions. By the way, I have a bunch here, so we'll have plenty to go through. But this is the first set of questions just about this idea of death and how it functions sort of mechanically. So now I'm going to read some comments and see what you guys are saying. So let me just make sure I didn't miss anything up here. This was about that, yes. The Brobdingnagian dead bodies. Oh, right, Gulliver's Travels. Yeah, I call them the Titans. It's a little more natural to read it as the beast. Poor writing? Yeah, sure. Um, Straight from the mouth of Miyazaki, supposedly. That punk Joe Cassidy has something to say about shadows. I will, hopefully, if we have enough time, I will get to shadows, because obviously Malekith figures into this, and so I do want to get to that. Could the Elden Beast be the shadow of the Greater Will? Well, it's an envoy of the Greater Will. I don't know about it being a shadow, but I also don't know what a shadow is. Yeah, and the idea that it's an Elden Beast specifically, I think is, that word isn't random. Let's see. The Elden Beast comes out of Radagon. The Vision's vessel holds the Elden Ring. Elden Beast has a fractured belly. Yeah, my take on the wound of the Elden Beast is that it may have to do with the Fingerslayer blade. And I don't really have any theories, like any more context beyond that. But it does seem like if you've got a weapon which was used to harm the vassals of the Greater Will, and then you've got a wound on one of the vassals of the Greater Will, it just seems like 1 + 1 = 2 there. So that seems like the most likely scenario. Another idea would be that maybe it in some way reflects Marika's, impalement with this Spear of Longinus sort of thing. Although that spear and the way that she's strung up is very much like an attack that the Elden Beast does, which would imply that the Elden Beast did that to her, which would kind of not make as much sense. Although, what makes sense in this game? I don't know. So, and I don't know exactly if I would agree with the Elden Beast coming out of Radagon. It comes out of like a black goop, which is... There's another weird side thing here that I don't want to get distracted with, but like the fact that there's weird black goop that comes out of the Amber Egg in Renala's second phase with Ronnie's voice, her disembodied voice, and also there's like black goop dripping down the Divine Towers, and maybe that has something to do with Shadow, and I don't. That's as much as I'm going to say there. But I don't think it really comes out of him, because it grabs him, it grabs his body, pushes it down, and then pulls it out as this sword. So it seems separate from him in some way. Yeah, the belly fracture could also be related to the red spear. Exactly, that's another theory. Okay. Right. Yeah, exactly. So Fate's death is how I would read that. Or Destiny's death. Mikla is Michael Jackson confirmed. Death is inevitable. It's in everyone's fate to die. Yeah. Well, so, because... that is also the problem, because if Destined Death doesn't... If it's only... Like, what's the scope, right? Is it specifically for... Because if it's not for everyone, then... Okay, did people not die before? Before death was removed? It opens up so many questions, because everybody is presumably... Like, okay, you have to sort of take the real world and assume that those presuppositions that you have in the real world are applied to Elden Ring's world, unless you see something that counterindicates it. So you would assume that the natural state of things is that, well, people eventually die. And therefore, they would be destined to die in some sense. Then you do have this weird thing, though, like with, you come into Dark Souls and you assume like, oh yeah, humans, these human-looking things are humans, right? It's like, no, humanity is this weird little wispy bit of the Dark Soul, and the natural state of humans, they're actually like these weird pygmy creatures that look like beef jerky people. So that's the natural state of things. So you have to be careful about how you bring those presuppositions from the real world into one of Miyazaki's worlds, because he definitely likes to flip those things upside down. David Kalanick says, so destined death equals your last death. In other words, no more rebirth. That's an interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about that. I do have some stuff on rebirth a little bit later on, so we'll get to that. Lutel description reveals the soulless demigods await revival. Was Godwin meant to be revived? Huh. I don't remember Lutel. Let's see. Lutel sacrificed her life so that in death she could continue to protect a soulless demigod until their revival, earning her the hero's honor of Erdtree burial. That's also confusing because with both Oleg and Lutel, their spirit ashes. So like, were they buried or were they cremated? Or was their body buried and then their spirit cremated? Or were they buried first and then cremated? But then, yeah, if the soulless demigods are going to be revived, is Godwin going to be revived? And are all those guys in the mausoleum... Well, first of all, are all those guys in the mausoleum demigods? I don't know. I don't know. I think the reason he should... this is, last protagonist says, I think the reason he should have died, and she's lamenting it, is because Ronnie used only a fragment of it, and both he and she died, but neither one died fully. Yeah, I mean, one way you could read it is that she's not saying, like, the plan was for Godwin to die a true death. The plan was for him not to die at all, but since he died, he should have died a true death. Like, that half-death is this horrible, cursed kind of death, and so nobody wants that. So, you know, the preference, the top preference is for him not to die at all. But if he was going to die, it's better that he would have died a true death. That could be all she's saying. But this line as a martyr to destined death, I think, I don't know, that it puts a slightly different spin on it. And I don't really know, well, I have one hypothesis, which I'm going to float a little later on, about that. The demigods did revive in the Japanese? Wait. I don't recognize some of the kanji, so I'd have to look at this more closely. Shita. Interesting. Okay, I will make a note of that. Okay, going on. Wait. Kate says, add destined death back and the order is no longer golden. Yeah, well, right. There's also the color aspect of this, where destined death is red, and there's this whole idea of sort of the crucible and primordial gold being red colored or copper hued and all that stuff. So, I don't know. If anyone can confirm, is Godwyn the firstborn demigod? I don't think it actually says. I'm pretty sure that it never says the order of birth for any of the litters, you could say. I think people sort of assume that Godwyn is the first one because he's got the God prefix, so it sort of makes sense. Like, okay, Godfrey's son, his firstborn son, you'd name him God something else, Godfrey, Godwyn, and then that would imply that Morgott and Mohg were later, and that was some aspect of the Crucible manifesting again. I could also see it being the other way, where Godwyn is sort of the perfected child, that something was not right with Morgott and Mohg because of this Crucible aspect, and then the Golden Order was tempered. This Crucible aspect was, cleansed or purified. That red hue was fully, expiated from the ring, or something along those lines, and then Godwyn was born as a result. So, but I'm pretty sure it never actually points to that clearly. It further cements why everyone loved Godwyn if he was self-sacrificing. Yeah, I mean that is another part of it, like this idea that he's a martyr to destined death. Well, look at all the Christian parallels here, right? Like, Marika is the god, and she's also the Lord, because she's Radagon, and potentially she's also this sort of Holy Spirit if she's Melina as well, which I sort of believe. And, some sort of Trinity kind of aspect there. And the whole idea of the Golden Order is this triangle, and I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. And Marika's crucified, and so the idea of Godwyn, who is, he's the son who then becomes a martyr, the son of God. I mean, I don't know, that it makes a lot of sense if he was going to die for everyone's sins, so to speak. On a thematic level, I don't know if it's not. There isn't enough evidence to sort of point to that mechanically, but that line is so interesting as a martyr to destined death. Destined death seems to be for those who have a fate. Yeah, and it's clear enough that not everybody does have a fate. I think, because doesn't it, when you open up the chest for the Fingerslayer blade, what does it say? Oh yeah, it's the Fingerslayer blade itself that says cannot be wielded by those without a fate, meaning that some people do not have fates. And I don't know what that means. Marika wanted to slowly release the Greater Will's influence. Black Knives wanted to destroy the Greater Will influence too, but much more radical, like terrorists, so they kill Godwyn. Marika snaps, accelerates her plan. I'm not totally sure what you mean by release the Greater Will's influence. Like escape it? Is that the idea? Or remove its influence from the world? Yeah, that is certainly one reading. I can't really evaluate it, honestly. It's sort of like, well, yeah, that's possible. I thought the idea with Godwyn was that he is the firstborn and thus inheritor of Marika, thus make him a good target for Ranni to upset the cycle and the Greater Will. This is also a big question. Like, why Godwyn? Why Godwyn specifically? Right, so at that point, we know that Mikla and Melania existed. Why not one of them? Is it because they're cursed? And, Mohg and Morgott are also cursed? Why not one of her siblings? I mean, okay, well, maybe it's just Maybe it's just she likes her siblings, but she's pretty, tsundere, so maybe not. Um, it's not clear why Godwyn. And why would she need to kill a demigod? Like, what mechanically is going on there where she specifically has to kill a demigod for this thing to work? Is it just to be able to, like, is her goal? This is a big question. Is Ronnie's goal just to escape her body? Or is her goal actually, is there some part of her goal that is about killing Godwyn specifically, or half killing Godwyn specifically? Like, would it have mattered to her if it wasn't Godwyn, if it was someone else? Let's say that was possible even, or like, what is technically going on there? That's another big question. Bilbo Baggins says, I just get this. Sorry, I just like saying Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins. I just get the sense that denying or avoiding death is an affront to nature. Going against the natural order causes a wrongness in the lands between. Yes, I think that's right. The question is, like, okay, but whose death and why? Kate is Kate. So let's see. Colt said, Destined death seems to be for those who have a fate, hence the destined part. Kate is Kate replies, that means Empyreans can operate outside the Golden Order. Huh. I wonder. Because then you do have, like, Ronnie, Mikla, and Melania all are doing something outside the Golden Order. Right? Ronnie's following this guidance of the moon, and eventually it's actually only in her ending that Marika's body, you actually see it dissipate. Whereas all the Elden Lord endings, you do something different, but Marika's body is still there. So there will be a question whether Ronnie actually became a god. And with Melania, there's the outer god of rot, and with Mikla, there's a lot of stuff going on with Mikla. Who knows what's going on there? But at least he left Golden Order fundamentalism. It's not really clear if he's completely, like, opposed to the Golden Order more broadly, or what that means, because it just says that what's the line? Abandoned can't spell fundamentalism, and yet the young Mikla abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melania as accursed rot. So it doesn't actually say that Mikla abandoned the Golden Order, and maybe that's just splitting hairs, but I think there is a distinction there, because fundamentalism does seem to be more about this idea that, a while back I started writing a script about, like, the religious histories of the lands between, and I never really got into it, but yeah, fundamentalism is scholarship in all but name. So it's this idea of, and this is where you get these intelligence-based miracles. It's this idea that you're not just relying on blind faith, you are relying on an understanding of the principles of the world. There's something more, like, objective about it, maybe more mathematical, or more like you're reaching some, platonic platonic world where this is the absolute truth, rather than just sort of accepting axioms without examining them. So it could be that Mikla abandoned this without abandoning the Golden Order. That's a question. Let me see. Why can we kill Radahn and the other demigods while destined death is still sealed? Exactly, yeah. So again, yeah, that brings up, as Colt says, things can still die, just not naturally. Right. So that brings up the difference between Fate's death versus other kinds of death, possibly, like death in battle. Um, and it may be that Radahn, like the fact that he's like on this battlefield, sort of waiting for a champion to come in this festival to kill him, that may be like because he can't die otherwise. Maybe he's just going to eternally live on this battlefield until someone strong enough can beat him, and that's the only way he can die. Um, they are not true deaths. Godric remains in the ground, his body able to be reabsorbed by the tree. Yeah, that's true. Godric's body is still there, and so is Morgoth's, but you kill, like, the weird part of them. Right, because Godric, like, his body is still there, but it's without all the grafts, and Morgoth is still there, but without all the omen features. With the other ones, they just die, right? I mean, Renala, you don't even kill, right? Renala is still alive, so that's a bit different, but she wasn't a demigod. Rykard is still alive, in a sense, right? Because the serpent starts to reconstruct itself. And that's a whole nother bag of worms, the whole thing with serpents, and, like, there is an immortal serpent god. Okay, like, deal with that. How does that fit into the cosmology of everything? And it has something to do with the early days of the Erd Tree, presumably, and possibly something to do with, like, ancient death hexes. So I have no idea what to make with that. But it is a good point that they don't necessarily die in a full way. I sort of wish that, like, once we release Destined Death, there would be some kind of gameplay change that would give us a clue as to what was going on there. Because the fact that nothing changes I mean, maybe that's a clue in itself, but it just leaves us kind of speculating about it all. That Punk Joe Cassidy says, I would suppose that we can defeat the demigods, but they still live on in the runes we take into our power, remembrances... in the runes we take into our power, remembrances, and the flow of runes in the world. Yeah. The remembrances are strange because it says that they're hewn into the Erd Tree, as if they're carved in, which clearly they're not, because we just literally get them. So I'm not sure what that means. Like, we have them in our enormous infinite TARDIS bag that we can carry all our stuff in. But you also get remembrances from, like, Astel and the Ancestral Spirit and Renala. Like, okay, so their remembrance is also hewn into the Erd Tree? That's sort of confusing as well. And then the fact that you get the great runes from killing the demigods, but they don't do anything. It's just like a symbol that you can see, and then it's only when you go up to the Divine Towers that you see, like, oh no, that's the great rune, or it's the benediction of the great rune. So that's a whole confusing thing, and all of that is further confused by the fact that those great runes, regardless of whether you acquired them all in the lead up to fighting the Elden Beast and all of that stuff, you can see them in the Elden Ring inside Radika's body. Right? Like, it's still there. Those circles, at least. I mean, the shape of the Elden Ring with these 4 circles and the line going through it is still, it's the same. It's not like it's missing pieces. So what does it actually mean that the shard bearers have shards? Okay, we're almost up to... Wait. Oh god, I just jumped down a bunch. Okay, oh my god, there's so many comments now. There's so many comments. Ah! I didn't realize there were this many. Wait. Okay, Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit faster here because it didn't load all of the comments at the bottom immediately, and now I just realized there's like 100 of them as I was reading this out. So I'm gonna go a little bit quicker and just pick on some specific ones. Last protagonist says, "Hear me, the burning of the Erd Tree is the first cardinal sin. Doing so will unbind destined death and slay the world itself." Is that Enya that says that? This is Melina, isn't it? No, wait. Oh no, it's a finger reader. Oh, the rolled finger reader. I see. Wait, the rolled finger reader mentions that destined death is sealed within the Erd Tree? I'm not really sure how to interpret that line. I mean, a sort of simple reading of this would imply that when you burn the Erd Tree, either through the Giant's Flame or with the Flame of Frenzy, which is also, by the way, another component that I didn't talk about, that is what unbinds destined death. But of course, you have to defeat Malekith because destined death is sealed in his sword, which was sealed in his body. So maybe it's hidden away in lots of different ways, right? It's sealed in his sword, and his sword is sealed in his body, and he's sort of sealed away in Farum Azula, which is like outside of time, and you can only get there by burning the Erd Tree. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yes. Well, it's also clear when we talk about the two fingers. Sorry, Colt said also sounds kind of like the two fingers saying some shit to avoid death. It's also got to be noted that when we talk about the two fingers versus the greater will, that the two fingers are not directly channeling the greater will. They apparently, according to Enya at least, take like a long time to communicate with the greater will. So all the stuff they say in between, like, let's imagine that, just for the sake of argument, that the greater will is like some creature and it just changes its mind sometimes, where it adapts to the situation. Okay, well, the two fingers aren't going to be able to reflect that adaptation or change of mind, because, you know, they will in like 1,000 years or however long it takes for them to communicate with it. But they are not the greater will. Let's see. Elden Enthusiast points out a good point. The Elden Beast is a god, since you get the god slain message, right? Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, there is a confusion about, like, what does it really mean to be a god anyway? Because, you know, when in Western culture, we're so monotheistic, you know, Abrahamic religion is so integrated into our culture that when you hear the word God, you assume it has a kind of primacy, right? But historically speaking, that wasn't necessarily the case. And if you go to a lot of Eastern cultures, that isn't necessarily the case. Especially ones that are that have less of that, you know, Manichaean Abrahamic influence. There isn't as much that connotation of like, well, there's one God. No, I mean, you have pantheistic cultures or even animistic religions like like with Shinto, where there's lots of gods, and God doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't necessarily mean like some fundamentally different kind of being. Gods can die, and they have, like devas in Hinduism. They're just sort of like a divine being. They are closer to perfection. They're closer. They're like further up on the scale of, I don't know, power. So they're not necessarily like fundamentally different than mortals, and they could be mortal as well. I mean, in Greek myth, for example, gods can be killed, new ones can be created. They're very whimsical and flighty, so they're not necessarily like these. That cultural association that we have when we hear God, the word God, is we sort of think of, omnibenevolent, omniscient, omnipotent, because of that Abrahamic influence. But in a lot of Eastern cultures, that doesn't exist. They're just like more powerful beings, essentially. So there is a question about when you get this, kami, what that means exactly in the cosmology of things. And then especially once you have demigods and outer gods, and the fact that, Rykard and Radon became demigod stepchildren to Queen Marika because of a marriage. And of course that also brings up the point of Radigan and whether he was Marika at the time. But I think there's... you want to be careful about what presuppositions you're bringing on what it means to be a god. It could just be that a god, like the Empyrean, right? That's Shinjin, I think is the word, which is that's the word in Buddhism, which is like it's essentially, how would you describe it? So in Buddhism, you have this cycle of samsara, which is the cycle of rebirth. And you think, okay, well, what is it exactly that gets reborn? Because you don't keep your memory and you don't keep your body. So what is it that's reborn? Well, Buddhism also, there's no soul. The whole sort of core concept of Buddhism is anatta, which is the concept of no self. Just different from the Japanese word for you, which is a strange coincidence. But the idea is that, like, if you examine your consciousness, you'll find all these different motivations and emotions and thoughts and processes, but behind it all, there's nothing that's actually unifying them. There's no actor behind the action. There's no thinker behind the thoughts. There is no self there. It's the same thing that David Hume talked about in Western culture back in the Enlightenment. This idea that, like, you're just made of component parts, and the thing which makes you to the degree that you are something whole is this continuity of consciousness, that there's like basic existence, you could even say. It's not even quite awareness, because Buddhism makes a distinction between awareness and consciousness and perception. So there's sort of this basic existence, life consciousness. I don't know how to describe it well. And that is what is reborn in the cycle of samsara. And you are a Shinjin if you are close to, basically if you're assured of reaching nirvana, of reaching, becoming a Buddha. Because they have this idea of like, it's this sort of stream. It's the analogy of a stream, and like you're a stream entrant. Once you go down the path of Buddhism, you may become a stream entrant, which is like, okay, you're started on the path to reaching enlightenment, but you may not reach it in this lifetime. You may reach it, your consciousness, which will be in a different form, will reach enlightenment somewhere else, further down the line. And then there's sort of like the twice returner and the once returner, The idea that it'll take you another rebirth in order to reach enlightenment. And then if you are Shinjin, that means I don't remember the Pali word for it, but it basically means that like you are assured of reaching Buddhahood. You're right at the cusp essentially, which is kind of what Empyrean means here. Even though Empyrean also has a totally different connotation of being like the divine fiery realm of God in Dante's Paradise, but that's a whole different thing. Anyway, sorry, long-winded. I don't even remember what I was trying to address there. Something about the words of gods and what that means. About the Elden Beast being a god. That was the thing. Yeah, so what it means for the Elden Beast to be a god, if that is correct, I don't know. It could be anything. Could be just that it's a powerful, divine being. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same thing as Marika, or the same category of thing as Marika, or same category of thing as the outer gods, or the fell god, or demigods, or what else. Okay, let's. I'm sorry, I'm gonna skip some of these because we gotta move on. Oh no, cursed comment from last protagonist. Let's see. Marika doesn't transform into Radagon until she falls and the red spear of Longinus disappears. Is Radagon the spear? Oh god. I mean, he is a weapon, right? Or at least he gets turned into one. That would be a bit strange if he was like a sort of shardy spear and then he turns into a guy and then who's also a woman and then turns into a sword, even though the woman's body is still there. But I mean, this is Elden Ring, so everything's on the table. Let's be honest. There is something weird about like living weapons in this game. There's a weird theme there with like the what are they called? Let me bring up oh god, don't do that. Of course, as soon as I start messing around with anything in the stream, it's gonna screw up. What are the weapons by the where are they? Okay, well, there's the Finger Slayer blade, obviously, so that's a weapon, and it's like the Sacred Relic sword. But then there's also the sorry, I'm just scrolling down right now. Oh, these weapons, the Nox weapons, is what I was thinking of. And I think they say, what are they called again? I'm just blanking on the name right now. Oh god, okay, I need to catch up on these comments. Give me a sec here. The Nox weapons, they're called like, oh, there we go. It's the first thing that came up. Nox Flowing Sword. Forged from the liquid metal of a silver tear. So it's literally a weapon made out of a living being. So there is that weird theme there, and I think there's some other things that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, some other places where that theme is explored. The idea, well, and also more generally, like the idea of metals being intrinsic to life in some way. And maybe also like the dragons being made of stone? I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna quickly cover some of these comments. So let me see. Why not Godric? What was that in response to? Why not Godric? Oh, that was probably in response to like, why didn't Ranni kill Godric? Yeah, I don't know. There's also that line from Enya where she's like, the demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika. As if to say, like, even if just to make sure that you're totally confused about the relationship between Renala's children and them being demigods, like, yeah, that really confuses thing. And the fact that Godric is and she even says that Godric is, what does she say? She says something about Godric being like, the fingers speak. How do I find that dialogue? Fingers speak. Yeah, literally the next line. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika. Godric the Grafted was but a distant relation. Like, but he's a demigod. So how does that make sense? I guess the word direct is maybe not supposed to be doing as much heavy lifting there. But also offspring. I don't know. I don't know about that. That's so confusing. Marika is called the Eternal. Why does she need an heir? She removed death from the rules of the world. Well, again, it's debatable what exactly the rules are. Also, it might be a kind of play on words where she's the Eternal because she's from the Eternal Cities. And actually, to support that, Gowry says he says of the lost sorceries of the Celians, descendants of the Eternal. I don't remember if that was changed to Eternals. If it was, let me just look that up quick. I know I'm getting behind on things. Wait, dialogue prompts? No, I want... Yeah, don't I want dialogue prompts? Oh, no, this is, right. Ashes, wait, where is it? Intro, change log items, blah, 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 NPC names, text prompts? Talk message? Oh, maybe it's just talk messages. Or is that the... Yeah, here we go. Descendants of the Eternal. Which is kind of weird, because, like, he doesn't say descendants of the Eternal Cities. So it might indicate that, like, the inhabitants, or maybe the Nox, maybe the Newman, who knows what, that the inhabitants of the Eternal Cities were called the Eternal, or the Eternals, or perhaps they are literally descendants of Marika. But I think that it's possible that Marika's name is sort of alluding to that. Chat is wildly delayed. It's a little delayed, but also I'm just spending so much time. I need to speed up here. Unusual Box says, I've been a big fan of your work. Just want to say thanks for your content. Thank you very much, Unusual Box. I was wondering, do you agree with the running thought that Godwyn is the statue in the Mikkela's Haligtree tree? You know, I haven't thought about it in a while. I seem to remember that Zlofsky on Twitter showed some images of it that made it look more like Marika. So I'm not entirely sure about that. Kevin Lasher says, I thought Godwyn and Ronnie were going to be in an arranged marriage and she wanted out. That's a thought. Yeah, maybe that was her fate. Again, sort of like, it's possible, and I don't know how to evaluate it, so... Why Godwyn was chosen is 100% pure speculation. Yeah, it does. I mean, it is a question of, like, excuse me. It is a question of what is the category of reason, right? So there's two questions, like, what is the reason that he was chosen, but also what's the category of reason that he was chosen, because it could be something like socially or emotionally motivated, like he's the golden child poster boy of the Golden Order, and therefore I want to stick it to them, or it could be that there's something mechanical. And so even before the question of what the reason is, it's like, what type of reason is applicable here? Okay, I'm gonna just, sorry, skip a lot of these, because I want to get on to the next thing. Crunchy, I need to fix the stream. The buffering is getting worse. I literally haven't changed anything, so I don't know why. Unwatchable at this point. Ugh. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, I missed some. Okay. The buffering stopped. The Rune of Death doesn't seem to have ever been attached to the Elden Ring, the Glowmite Queen getting her power out of it before Marika puts it in Malekith. I will get to that in a minute. Okay. Because we killed Radigan, yeah, possibly. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through these really fast, guys. Yeah, there's so many good comments here. I'll probably have to rewatch the stream and look through the live stream, the live chat replay. God in Elden Ring simply means that being at the head of an order. Oh, yeah, it keeps on bumping. Sorry, I'll catch up in just a second here. I'm just reading these right now. Okay, alright. I'm back. I have a feeling that the comments are way behind still, and that there's still stream problems, and I'm super sorry for that. You know, if enough of you feel that the stream is just really screwed up, we can call it quits. Until I see that, I will continue. Yeah, hopefully it's working for most of you. Sorry about the technical stuff, guys. We're gonna move on to the next part, because this is literally just point 1A that we've got over right now. So I'll try to be a little bit more interactive with the stream, so I don't spend a bunch of time covering comments in between. So during the age of the Erd Tree, Carrion astrology withered on the vine. The fate once writ in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. This is the telescope description. So that there's a question why. I guess you could say why and how had it been fettered by the Golden Order. Was it Radon stopping the stars? Was it the removal of Destined Death, which is Fate's death? Was it Radagon marrying Renala, or perhaps the development of Golden Order fundamentalism? I mean, there's this, I mentioned in some of my videos the web of word, this pagan symbol, which is the three sort of the triple three threads of fate being weaved together, which looks like Radagon's rune, so maybe it has to do with that. And then there's a question of was Fate's death written in the stars? Was Destined Death something controlled by the stars? So before Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring, okay, let's take the assumption that the Golden Order fettered the fate in the night skies. That means that it was only after the creation of the Golden Order that the fate in the night skies was fettered, which means that it was only after Destined Death was removed that the fate in the night skies was fettered by the Golden Order. So that would imply that before Destined Death was removed, when it was in the Elden Ring, that there was fate in the night sky, and that and that fate's death was a part of that. Although I don't know what any of that means. And then we can get further down this rabbit hole, which is if the stars were guided by a moon, which I believe it's the moon of Noxtella that says that. Oh yeah. The moon of Noxtella was the guide of countless stars. So, maybe specific stars, we don't know. But if stars in general were guided by things like a moon, did the moon also guide Destined Death? Did it guide people to their death? Or maybe did it guide stars to their death? Is Ronnie's moon a moon of death? I don't know. That's more just like open question that I don't really know. Colt brings up an interesting point about celestial dew. I want to know the difference between silver tier and night tier. See celestial dew. It's a Nox statue in the Church of Vows where you use night tiers to affect your fate in a way that resolves any bonds that have been broken. It's almost some timey-wimey stuff. Yeah, and it specifically says it recalls a time when the fate was in the stars, something like that. Recalls a time... No, what does it say? Did I miss it? I skipped past it, I think. Right. A night tier. This is a recollection of those times. The stars of the night sky guided fate. And this is a recollection of those times. So it's like you cleanse yourself in this stuff, which is connected to the past when fate was different in some way. And somehow that allows you to reverse antagonism, as if like you're going back in time before they were antagonistic. I mean, that on its own sounds reasonable as a description of what's going on. I don't really know how to follow that anywhere. So, yeah, some timey-wimey stuff, and sort of a bunch of question marks. There's also this question of these lines from Melina. Last Protagonist just pointed out the issue is it's a run-on sentence in Japanese about the demigods being direct offspring of Marika. It's clear that Godric is a distant relation. Okay, that kind of makes more sense than... It's as if to say... the demigods are all offspring of Queen Marika, but also there's Godric, and he's a more distant relation. That would certainly remove a problematic conception there. So we have these lines from... I have a feeling, based on how people are commenting, that this chat is like way far, and so it's like, what does it mean exactly? Like this idea of being like Elden Lord seems way more important in terms of who you can be in the hierarchy of the cosmology, but there are also these other lords, and so is it like there's just a bunch of different systems here? Like the Elden Ring system is just one of many, and Elden Lord is the lord of that system, but maybe the beasts had their own system or have their own system, and also night is a different system and chaos is a different system. And then the second part of the line, as sure as night follows day, as if it's this inevitable consequence, which would kind of, if a death is inevitable, that sort of brings us back to the idea of destined death. So like, if you become the Lord of Chaos, you are destined to die. This is all wild speculation, or rather, it's just open-ended questions that I don't know how to answer. And how does this all play back into like, what does destined death do? Because I feel like there's a few key questions in this game that would unlock a huge amount of understanding the whole world and the people in it. Like, one big question would be Radigan. Like, where did Radigan come from? Because if you understand where Radigan came from, it's going to give you some information about his connection to the Fire Giants. Is going to give you some information about Marika and her motivations, and why her motivations are different in some way from Radigan's motivations, and the relationship between the Greater Will and Marika and the Erd Tree, and it would just unlock a whole big chunk of that story. I think the other big thing would be understanding what it meant to remove destined death from the Elden Ring. Because there's so many different interpretations you can put on that, but like, understanding that wrongness is, I think that would just unlock so many things about fire, about the Glowmide Queen, even about thorns. Actually, on the point of thorns, side note here, if you aren't familiar with A Human Justicar, there's another YouTuber, I would highly recommend that you check her out. She has a video on Radigan's sorcery, which is excellent. I just watched it, and I watched a couple of her other videos. She's very logical and very good analysis. I would highly recommend that one, because there is that question of Radigan studied sorcery with Renala as the wife of Queen Renala, and nobody's really asked, well, what type of sorcery did he learn? Like presumably before he became Elden Lord, he could do sorceries, right? And there's all these different conspectuses. So anyway, that's a really good video to deal with that issue. Anyway, that was just sort of a side note, but I just think that this understanding what destined death does, what removing it does to the world, basically trying to figure out like what the scope of it is. Is it something that just deals with the Erd Tree? Because in terms of gameplay, that's essentially all it does. All it does in terms of gameplay is it opens up the Erd Tree. It burns the thorns that are stopping us from entering the Erd Tree and finishing the game. Is that all it does in the lore? Is it just deal with that? Or does it have something more specifically to do with Marika? Is it about gods? Or beings related to Marika? Is it just about the Elden Ring? Like, one hypothesis, which I put down here, is destined death Marika's fated death, specifically a built-in kill switch in the Elden Ring. Like, okay, here's a deal. You get to have this power. The power of the Golden Ring. The One Ring, right? This is the Ring of the Nibelung. You get to have this power, but there's a catch. You are going to be fated to die. You take it into yourself, and you get to be god of this world. But, as god, there's an expiration date here. And maybe Marika removed it to try and debug the code so that she could live forever. And maybe it's just about her. Maybe she killed Godwyn, or she was trying to kill Godwyn as a way to satiate the requirements of destined death, because Godwyn is partly made of her, at least in a metaphorical sense, and if not in a literal sense, because that's also possible. He's a scion of the Golden Bough. She is essentially, I don't know, is she the Erdtree in some weird way? Okay, whatever. But maybe you have to kill the god of the Elden Ring, and he's the closest thing you can get, and so that, I don't know, alleviates the symptoms of destined death, something along those lines. I don't know. I wish we could refine the scope of what destined death means in the world, because it's clearly like it's the big catalyst for everything before the secondary or tertiary catalysts, right? Like if you think Godwyn, the Knight of the Black Knives, is sort of the secondary catalyst, and that leads to Shattering the Ring, which leads to the Shattering War. Well, this all begins because of the creation of the Golden Order. That is the key to the whole thing. So if we could just fine-tune our, like, the parameters of what Destined Death deals with, I think that would just unlock so much of the story. And is it, I mean, if there's something special about your fated death, is the idea that, like, well, maybe if you change that fate, now you're changing. If something is fated to happen, it, in a sense, already exists as a. It exists at some level. Like, it doesn't exist in the present, it exists in the future, but it already is going to happen, and so because it's inevitable, in a way, it already has happened. That's not really the right way to put it, but, like, you know, in some level, at some level, it already exists. So if you suddenly change that, now you have a different reality with a different future. And so now, does this, like, change time? Do you have multiple worlds converging? I just, again, this all depends on exactly what Destined Death is. And all we really know is it looks like a weird sword and a thorny, rooty thing. And when you unleash it, it goes on fire and it burns the Erdtree. And it used to power some other fire. And you can steal a piece of it, and that piece looks like something else entirely, right? It looks like, what does it look like? When you steal a piece of it, it looks like this, right? That's not what Destined Death looks like now. So this is a piece that was, I don't even know, is this a piece of it? It's not really clear, like, and this is definitely going to be important, I think, in the DLC because of because of this. Wait, do I not have the title? Oh, dang. Where is it? Let me just look it up here. Come on. Because of this. Yeah? So I definitely think this idea, and you know, this is, as I've covered in my alchemy video and some other videos, the Solve et Coagula, that's always the symbol for it. This is not the Ouroboros, by the way. Some people have mistaken that, this idea of the two. The Ouroboros is one snake eating its tail. It is a single snake. This is a different concept. I mean, they may be related in some way, but they're not the same thing. So, anyway, let me just read some comments. 26 messages behind in present time. Well, and since then, I've only gotten about 10, so... I think to understand Destined Death, you need to understand the Glomide Queen, and that's its whole big thing. Well... yeah, I suppose that's... I don't actually think that... I think it could go the other way around. I think if we understood Destined Death more, that would explain more of the Glomide Queen. I mean, we know that the Glomide Queen was out to kill gods or demigods. Again, there's that ambiguity as to the word gods and what they mean. We don't know exactly when that happened. Actually, let me skip a little bit here. This is all about rebirth, which is a big question. But there is the question of Malekith and shadows and what this all means. This is a little bit more relevant, I think, to where we're talking. So there is a question of... says, long ago Geraint was a beast of such terrifying ferocity that his former name meant death of the demigods. So presumably this is Malekith, right? Malekith means death of the demigods. Does that mean that he killed demigods? Right, so is that implying that he actually killed demigods, or just that he had the ability to kill demigods? If he did kill demigods, was it after the Night of the Black Knives? That wouldn't make much sense. Godwyn was the first demigod to die, but after the Night of the Black Knives, Malekith hid away as Geraint. So his name, Death of the Demigods, came before Night of the Black Knives, in all probability. And how did that work? Like, once Destined Death was sealed within him, what was he doing? Was he acting as an assassin for Marika, killing demigod competition, or does it have to do with this line from Marika? Hear me, demigods, my children beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, in other words, nothing, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices. So was she did she have a bunch of demigod children, or were there other, I don't know, demigods that aren't related to her for some reason, that she was, they they didn't get powerful enough, so she was just killing them off? Like, what's the deal there? Let me read a couple. Let me read a couple of comments. If something is fated, parts of the causal pattern that makes it happen already exist. Yeah, so there's like the idea of, well, I'm not remembering the line exactly, but it's like, if God determines that you are to die in a place, he will essentially make it, he'll essentially design things such that you will walk to that place, right? I'm butchering the actual line there, but the idea being that, if we don't necessarily break the rules of the world in terms of causality, when fate is concerned. It's just that the causal pattern which leads from point A to point B is such that it can't go any different way. But then the question is, okay, well, what happens when you remove point B, right? If point B is death, what happens when you remove point B? Well, that's really an open question, because if there's like a chain of causality that leads you from point A to point B, does it mean that that chain is different now? Or does it mean that you get to point B but you just continue going on? Or does it mean that point A doesn't exist? I just don't know. Like it's a really open question. But yeah, it is a good point that fate is sort of contextualized within causality, I think. I mean, that's what the laws of regression and causality imply. Although we have the law of causality, and then we also have the law of regression. So there's an implication that like there is something opposite causality, which would be, by being a dichotomy with causality, it would be non-causal. So that implies that there's a law of the universe which is not governed by causality, right? And that means that basically that logic is out the door, right? It means that we don't know if things can affect things in the past. We don't know if things can affect things without having any kind of causal relationship. So it just kind of it just opens up a bunch of doors that you look inside and you have no idea how far the hallway leads. I think this is in reference... Oh, I see. In reference to Melina, Chris Smile says, sometimes I feel like she's Marika's daughter, the incarnation of the Rune of Death, the glum-eyed queen. I think it's... You know, if we do the closest reading of the game, I think it's clear that she's Marika's daughter. Excuse me. But she also has that line where she's like confused about being born of a mother. So that doesn't make sense, right? So I think the way in which she's Marika's daughter has to be a way that is not completely intuitive when you say the word daughter. You know, it could be daughter as in the way that you know, if you're in a monastery, you call everybody brother or something like this, right? Like you use familial terms in a non-familial way, and actually this is even more common in Japanese, where you know you refer to people as older sister or uncle or whatnot, because of the sort of because of their age and the social dynamic there. They're sort of in a elderly sister role or in an avuncular role, without necessarily being a blood relation. So that's always a possibility. I think that she is in some way Marika. I mean, the fact that Marika is not conscious, is not visibly conscious in this game, I think is telling. And clearly it's not enough to say that, well, like Radigan is in her body, because something happens when he takes over her body, or she transforms into him, right? That's different than what it was when she was crucified, and is also different because her body is still there even after Radigan's body is turned into a sword. Like, her body is there at the end after you beat the Elden Beast. So they are separate in some way. They had different motivations, even if they were originally one being and they were always one being. Like, they are separate in some way. And so the fact that she is not conscious or active in any way, and that she's like a husk of stone, I think is pointing to something. And then you have the connection with the Elden Beast track. So the Elden Beast track, and I did a little short video on this. The Elden Beast track, after Radigan's theme, when the Elden Beast actually comes out, is this. There's just like a harp and some percussion, and then there's this solo female voice singing. And then the solo female voice is like very plaintive, and then suddenly this like really robust choir enters in, and it's harmonically different. The solo female voice is singing in A minor, and then suddenly this choir comes in on a B flat major chord, which for the music theory fans is a Neapolitan. It's very weird. It's like striking, as if it's in conflict somehow with the female voice. And I sort of read that as it's Marika singing, or Marika's spirit, her will, whatever. It's a representation of Marika in some way, versus the greater will, the people of the lands between, the Elden Ring, whatever, the choir of fate, of it's somehow her versus everybody else, or something along those lines. And then that track is used, a variation of it. It was separately written, but it's the same, the same harmonies, the same melody, is used for Melina sacrificing herself. So when Melina, in the cutscene where Melina jumps into the forge, it plays. It was fairly quiet, so you have to kind of turn it up, but it plays a track, which is a variation of the Elden Beast theme. And to me, that sort of kind of goes with This Is Marika. And also the fact that, like, she has the power of Finger Maidens, but she's not a Finger Maiden. The fact that she can take you to Round Table Hold, all of this stuff, I think it just makes a lot of sense if she is... I'm not necessarily theorizing about the specifics there, but mechanically how that works, but in some way she's like a spirit or some aspect of Marika, and that also plays into the idea of like Marika being the god, the Lord, and the Holy Spirit all at the same time. So I mean, it's not an exact parallel because she's not a father and Radigan's not a son, presumably. But there is also weird connections with Radigan and Godwyn, so I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, that's my view on Melina, and also it explains the Glomide Queen connections if you also believe that Marika is the Glomide Queen, or was the Glomide Queen. Which is not something I want to get into super deeply right now. Sorry, I know that's interesting, but let me just read a couple comments quick. Hey John, sorry I missed you coming in, and sorry about the stream. As most people in the stream probably know by now, I've just had a bunch of problems with the stream, so I'm sorry if there's still buffering, and I'm sure it's still way behind, so sorry for that. I guess it's kind of weird that there's no concept of returning destined death into the Elden Ring. Like, we touch the rune in Farum, but then it's not like we add it back to the ring at the end. Yeah, I didn't even mention that. Like, regarding the way that the Great Runes are shards of the Elden Ring, but there's also... And you get them, but then you also get them from somewhere else, but then they're also still in the Elden Ring. So that is entirely weird. But then you unleash the Rune of Death, and you don't put it back in the Elden Ring, as far as we can tell. Unless you, like, put it back in upside down. I don't know. Von Lustre says, I believe there's a theory that death of the demigods could refer to potential children of the Glomite Queen, since she is an Empyrean, and presumably Marika was as well. Yeah, that is also possible, but it is strange because there's also kind of a... We have to suppose a lot of different things, because the Glomite Queen was out to kill demigods or gods, perhaps. There's a bit of ambiguity in the Godskin setup. And so, like, whether everybody was just killing demigods all the time? I mean, you could imagine that before Marika became god, that she was an Empyrean, and there were other Empyreans as candidates, in the same way that Ronnie and Mikela and Melania are. So there could be Marika and the Glomite Queen, and perhaps other people. And it could be that they were all demigods. You know, right? The, what is it? You know, it is a cycle. It is all a cycle. Where does it say that again? It is merely a cycle. This is the memory of grace, your starting item, right? It is merely a cycle. Stand before the Elden Ring, become the Elden Lord. It's already telling you, I mean, it was a theme in the previous games, but it's telling you very explicitly, it is merely a cycle. As if everything, you know, what was it in Battlestar Galactica? It's all happened before, it'll all happen again. It could be something like that. So there could have been another situation with Empyreans who were demigods, and they could all be fighting each other, and Marika had Malekith, you know, kill other demigods. It is strange because this title would make a lot of sense if it was given to Malekith, if he was called Malekith when he sealed the Rune of Death within himself. But it sort of wouldn't make as much sense with the timeline of, like, well, he wouldn't have been able to do that presumably before Marika had access to the Elden Ring. Of course, there's also the question of whether Marika had the Elden Ring before Destined Death was plucked from it, and also the question of whether you need to have Destined Death to use it. I don't know, it's all kind of open-ended there, so I'm not sure. John says, I was thinking about the mine other self dialogue today. I wonder if what happened with Radigan was that Marika got sick of flawed children with Godfrey and contacted a parallel universe of herself. Mine other self might be her spirit world counterpart. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Clearly there is something going on in this game where things are unnaturally... There's something going on. I don't know what it is. It is something to do with the fact that identities are not identifiable in a normal, intuitive way. And what that means exactly, I don't know. It could be that there's something going on with multiple timelines. It could be that there's multiple worlds. It could be that... it could be that this is just a condition of how the world works. You know, it doesn't have to be that the world before things went wrong was like our world in any reasonable sense. It could be that just the logic of the world allows for these things to happen. Whatever it is, though, there is something weird that feels like... I mean, it feels a bit like Dark Souls 3, honestly, where we had the lands converging on Lothric, or the Ringed City, where like things are unnaturally pressed together, that there's a conflict there's conflict within reality somehow, at the basic logical level. And so I don't know if that's a multiverse kind of thing, or fate or what. But yeah, it would make sense because she says, I mean, she tells Radigan, "Thou art yet to become me," is literally like, you just take out the fluff from that dialogue, and she's basically saying, "You are not me, mine other self." Right? Like there is an inherent contradiction there that needs to be resolved, and it's about as explicit as you can get, actually, in saying that they are separate people and they are also the same person. And so you need a way to make that sense and to make that make sense. And I don't know, there needs the fact that clearly is tied to a greater theme of things being the same thing but also different. Two roundtable holds, Godefroy, Malekith, and Gurranq even, coexisting, Farum Azula being outside of time, Mikula and Saint Trina. I mean, just absolutely every part of the world has this theme running through it of things being the same but different. And you could come up with, like, there's two ways you could parse that. One way to parse that is to say there's a bunch of different contextual answers for why these weird anomalies are there. Or you could say there's basically one reason why all of this is the way it is. And that's why I'm kind of focusing on Destined Death, because in terms of likely candidates for what could affect the structure of reality, it would probably be something to do with the Elden Ring. And if you're messing around with fate, that seems like a pretty good contender. And you might think it could be the shattering of the ring, and there's good reasons to think that, but there's enough things that had to happen before the ring shattered, and obviously if we have non-causal laws of the universe, then who knows, things can happen after each other that affect what happened before. But I think given the way that's presented as like that part of the world, that part of the history is actually much clearer compared to the early history, and it's presented in a basic timeline. I feel like Radigan existed before the ring was shattered. Mikula and Melania were born before the ring was shattered. So there's already weird things that are divided or doubled or things like that before the shattering of the ring. So the next likely candidate would be the removal of Destined Death. And therefore something to do with fate. Which does kind of lend credence to a alternate timeline or parallel universe type of thing. Unusual Box says, as there is a lot of twinning to balance things out, America birthing demigods, then the Glowmide Queen used to kill them. Maybe there is something there. It seems things come in twos in the Elden Ring. Could be that America and the Glowmide Queen are actually twins. I mean, I don't... it would certainly make a kind of sense thematically. I would also kind of like that because I think there's good reasons to think that America is the Glowmide Queen. Namely just things concerning the fact that the Glowmide Queen was an Empyrean, that she was a queen, that she's got a relationship with the Rune of Death, the relationship with Malekith, the sort of narrative line of seeing a shadowbound beast go mad and turn on their master because of some kind of betrayal, and then we get an explicit reference to Marika betraying Malekith, Um, but it would also make sense if, in some way, Marika was the Glow-Eyed Queen and also not the Glow-Eyed Queen. If she was, if they were twins, but to be twins actually means that you are the same person to some degree. It's the same genetic code in some way. The same immortal essence divided into two, which could also, if Melania and Mikla are also the same person, quote unquote, in some way. Like, obviously they're not the same person, but maybe they are at the same time. Then that might explain the thing with shadows, which I think I wrote here. Is Melania Mikla's shadow? Because she's the blade of Mikla, she's defending him, she's protecting him. There is always this implication in FromSoft games, in all of the FromSoft games essentially, that wolves are like these noble protectors. They are the knights, the guardians. They're loyal is the idea, and that is what Melania is. And she's got these. She's got the false arm like Sekiro, and she's got a katana, and basically a lot of stuff similar to that sort of archetype. So maybe she's a wolf. Sekiro was wolf essentially. Is the same concept there, and Artorias, and it goes back, and even in Armored Core as well. So that could kind of explain it. Like, maybe they don't have shadows because they are more godly, and therefore the fact that they were split sort of, even though Mikla has a shadow, his shadow side is a demigod because he's so powerful. Who knows? Colt says that Melina is linked to Ronnie somehow. Yeah. I also wonder if Miyazaki threw in false flags. No, sorry, not false flags. That has a totally different connotation. Like red herrings is what I mean. Things that are similar thematically but don't have a literal connection. Because I could also buy that Melina and Ronnie are just... Well, it could also be that Marika tried to do something similar to what Ronnie did. If Marika was the Glow-Eyed Queen, and maybe she wanted to escape the control of the greater will, or her fate, or whatever, and she held on to Destined Death in order to kill her body or something like this. Maybe it's a parallel to what Ronnie did. And so if Melina was Marika, or just if you think that Melina was the Glow-Eyed Queen and she did something like that, then that would kind of explain a connection between the two, without necessarily being a direct connection. But it could also be that everyone in this game is Marika to some degree. So... John point. Let me just go to the bottom of the chat to load this. John also says, I have a feeling that there's something with the relationship between Melania and Millicent that can explain the relationship between Marika and Melina. Yeah, so I wrote that down here. Millicent says, I am of Melania's blood. Her rotted blood, by the way. But in what capacity, I know not. I could be sister, daughter, or an offshoot. And that's such a weird thing to say. Like, okay, first of all, you didn't say mother, so glad we got that out of the way. But an offshoot, like if you just said I could be an offshoot of Melania, the natural assumption would be to read that as like, oh, you're a daughter or something like this. Like you're descended from her, right? But to say sister, daughter, or an offshoot is to say that there's something else besides sister or daughter. Like maybe literally an offshoot. Maybe she was like a rebirthed Melania. Somehow, if you. Since. Let's assume that destined death means that, like, there's no destined death, so you can't die for some reason. Whether it's. I'm just assuming for now this applies to Melania, which I don't know. Then maybe if you died, you wouldn't die, but you also would. Because you died, so okay, you're dead, and now you come back, but you never actually died. So like Melania goes along, Melania, she gets killed by something. She gets killed by the rot. It blossoms, right? Okay, she dies, but she also gets reborn as Millicent. But at the same time, she can't die, so she's still going along as Melania. Something like that could... I mean, I don't know if that's exactly right, but something along those lines could kind of make sense. Could kind of make sense with Marika as well. Unusual Box says the ultimate character that links important people is now Torrent. Yes, it links Mikola and the Three Wolves and Ronnie and that statue in Farum Azula and the Snowy Crone potentially and Renala and yeah, Torrent is. I'm sure there's going to be more narrative context for Torrent. It also links him with the ancestor spirits and all of that. And also there's something about horses. I wrote that here. Torrent chooses you. There's a bunch of horse graves in crumbling Farum Azula. Ohid literally means like a country of horses. There's the falling star beasts, which are like, they're from the stars, they're from space, but they look like horses, even though they're also kind of like a version of Astel. There's tree sentinels in Loretta, where they're like, I don't know if this is a gameplay concession, but they're like one being with their horses, which might relate to the idea of like the Albinarchs being one being with their wolves, and the whole idea of shadows, and maybe also the Knights Cavalry are that way. So, yeah, there is definitely something with Torrent that needs explaining. Tough Eyes says the totality ending that was cut out, in regards to the concept, both world spiritually and in regards to the lore, do you think there's any credit to that? As far as I'm aware, there is no... let's see, how many endings do we have? We have 6, right? There's no 7th ending. There's no extra ending besides the ones that we got. There was a fake video made by Garden of Eyes, who has a history of being pretty scummy about not clearly delineating what is essentially mods from cut content, and kind of trying to sell things off as like big discoveries. Garden of Eyes made a video that was a fake ending, and there was some text dialogue there was some stuff in the text dump, I don't remember exactly what, that referenced an Age of Absolute, which people thought might have been another ending, but it's actually just an alternative name for the Age of Perfect Order. It's the Gold Mask ending, essentially. As far as I'm aware, in all the data mining and stuff like this, there has never been any other ending besides the ones that we get in the game. There is a bit of dialogue that seems to come from either Mikola or Melania, which, what is it? Yeah, so there's this bit of dialogue. Which is put next to... It seems to be in Melania's stuff. So it seems to me like maybe there was something where she was talking to Miquella's tree body in her fight, where she says, "My dear twin, accept this gift, a gift of abundance, my last drop of dew. Let all things flourish, whether graceful or malign." But I think, yes, there's also this bit of in the text dump, which is next to Melena's frenzied flame ending dialogue, and so here's usually they're like grouped together by, well, they're grouped together in different ways, honestly. So we have a bunch of the ending stuff, right? Yeah, see here, this was the Age of Absolute, right? The Age of Order, the Age of Absolute. I think that's the only thing that it comes from. Age of Fracture, Age of the Duskborn, Blessing of Despair, and then we have Ronnie's dialogue for her ending. Alternate dialogue, and then Melena's dialogue for the variation on the Frenzied Flame ending where she appears. Or wait, is it in every version of the Frenzied Flame ending? Yeah, it must be. Yeah. And then we have this dialogue, which is weird, because then after this, we just go straight into a couple of other things. We get the cutscene with Melina. We get the cutscene with the Rune of Death being unbound. So this one says, young seedling, return to the bosom of the earth. But remember well, thou art mine. So shall I give of myself. This is for thee, mine abundance, my drop of dew. Quench thy thirst throughout thy frame, blossom and burgeon time and again, grow larger, stronger, until the day cometh. And another bit of dialogue, when thou canst share in my dream, Elden Ring, O Elden Ring, beget order most elegant from my tender reverie. A reverie is essentially sleeping, so this would kind of imply that this is maybe from Miquella. And then the dialogue, if thou covetest the throne, impress my vision upon thine heart. In the new world of thy making, all things will flourish, whether graceful or malign, which is the same line that Melania says in that cut bit, in what presumably Melania says in that cut bit from her boss fight. So this sort of implies that this would be Miquella in some kind of cut scene. And if I remember correctly, there are some odd little pieces in the datamine files regarding like Miquella's ring. He's wearing a ring on his finger, and I think there's some trigger attached to it. So it does seem like potentially there was either an ending involving Miquella, or possibly this could just be like, this might be the end of the endings, and then this could be just other cutscenes, other like special cutscenes, like with Melina first greeting you and etc. So not sure what's going on there, but anyway, that kind of covers the whole ending idea. So, Caio Barbosa, good night. Glad you could stop by. Bilbo Baggins says Elden Ring is an allegory for particle physics and astronomy, including parallels to eternal cyclical cosmic inflation and the heat death of the universe. Yeah. It's possible. I mean, I should say, that is definitely part of the background out of which the cosmology of the game is put together to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, clearly, like you go back to Dark Souls, and there's very clearly a parallel there with the sort of heat death of the universe. Very literally, a heat death of the universe. You know, the fire will die, and then it's an age of dark, and that is literally. I mean, it's actually called in cosmology. It's called the Dark Era. You know, once the universe expands to such a degree that there's no real matter left. It's just black holes and scattered photons and whatnot. It would just be dark and cold and nothing's happening. So it is literally called the Dark Era. So yeah, that whole like real life predictions of the end of the universe, I think, definitely form part of the backdrop. I don't know how much to apply that, to kind of point to in one direction towards a theory or another theory. So, oh, you just said you're pulling it out of your ass. No, honestly, I think you're right. If you're interested in that stuff, I'm very partial to the what is it called? Cyclic cosmology. It's like geometric cyclic. No, it's three C's. I thought. It's the theory proposed by. Oh God, I'm just blanking on all the names. I'm thinking about Elden Ring too much. The guy that worked with Stephen Hawking, he's an old British guy, a knight. It's called like cyclic cosmology, something like that. It's a really nice idea that like the universe expands to a point where it literally has no way to measure itself, and therefore there is no distinction between space, and therefore it can just become a single point again, and so it just eternally refreshes anew. I think it's a very elegant idea. Tough Eyes says Godfrey is the actual man and also the pinnacle. Radigan is the idealized man, one for survival, the other for civilization. Although America is incredibly vain. Yeah, that's a nice reading of it. Radigan is like Radigan being the civilized man. Well, Godfrey is also like, he is the act of civilizing man, right? Because Horalu is the barbarian. He is the primitive warrior, just essentially no better than an animal, a beast. But through the action, the fetters of Serash, he becomes civilized. He becomes fit to be a lord. Flavor West says the whole America's multiple identities thing seems to align heavily with Jewish theology. As a practicing Jew, I saw it very clearly, but maybe that's just me. Yeah, and there is it continues. In Jewish theology, God has multiple sides. One of them is feminine and exists as a spirit that is not physical. The other is masculine and is a literal guy warrior who wields lightning. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not deeply familiar. I've delved into some of the more occult side of Jewish theology regarding Kabbalah and or Kabbalah, however you say it. And there are some parallels there with Elden Ring, the Path of the Flaming Sword, and the sort of division of the world into different Sephiroth. There's also, I would say, parallels there in Hinduism. This idea that essentially all the gods in the Hindu religion are avatars of each other. So there's sort of like a primary god who is actually divided into two, and then they also have different versions of themselves who are also other gods, and then they have children, but those children are also themselves. There's a lot of that weird stuff going on in Hinduism. So there's definitely some some real life theological parallels. Oh, it just jumped down all the way here. Okay, that's not too bad. I'll just read a couple more of these. Yes, John points out, speaking of Melania and Mikla, I feel more and more like those two are almost representations of the results of Marika's biggest actions. I think whatever Marika was trying to do, she had to stop death to accomplish it. Mikla, I think, represents this cessation of death, but then the side effect of this was that life started to bubble under the surface and produced rot, like a pressure cooker in which pressure just can't be contained. And I think the manifestation of this was Melania. Yeah, I'll continue. So Marika is trying to stop death while she works on the rebus or whatever, and the twins are born as a manifestation of the consequences of this move. Mikla as the manifestation of death being stopped, and Melania as a manifestation of life pushing back against this and ending up cancerous and violent as a result. Well, I would say, I think I mentioned this in my video on the Crucible, but I was sort of in passing more than anything else, that one thing which I feel confident of, even though it's just theoretical, is the idea that the rot is scarlet because of a lack of death. That scarlet, because I couldn't figure out for the longest time, like, why there's this connection between, like, blood and fire, and this all makes kind of sense, like, hot-blooded, when you're living, if you've got flushed cheeks, you're living. You get warm when you're active. This idea between like fire and blood and life, and also going back to Dark Souls, the idea of like burning ambition, burning things. This is the you're really truly living if there's something fiery about you. And it also goes to Berserk. There's a famous scene where Guts and Casca are looking down at the Band of the Hawks camp, and Guts has this sort of one of the few sort of somber monologues about how what he sees is that like everybody has a dream. They have these, and they're like little bonfires, and they cast their bonfires together when they see someone like Griffith, because his dream is huge. It's a roaring bonfire, and they all try to throw their lot in. And so it's this equation of like ambition and fire being the same thing. It's this burning thing, but it's also destructive, and it's sort of a lust for life. But all of that is kind of weird when you bring in Scarlet Rot, because Scarlet Rot is also red. And since the color stuff seems to be so important in Elden Ring, it's like, well, why is Scarlet Rot red when it's all about decay? I mean, yes, it's about rebirth, but it's decay. So I think the idea there is it's decay. You haven't eliminated decay, but you have eliminated death in some sense. And when you decay without death, it's living decay. It's not like, because normally what happens is, if something dies and then it decays. But this is, you still decay even though you can't die. And so what happens is, okay, if you die first and then you decay, it turns black, right? It's Negredo in the alchemical tradition, right? It's putrefaction, it's disgusting. It's like what we see with Deathroot. That is decay. There's bugs everywhere around Godwyn. But what we see with the Scarlet Rot is it's decay, but it's red, and it's sort of thriving. So to me, that is an indication of decay without death. It's blood red, but it's still putrefying while being alive. I don't remember exactly what I was responding to there, but yeah. Oh, yes, I do agree that Mikla and Melania seem important in terms of Marika's motivations, to figure out what the whole plan is, even if it's not her plan, like the Greater Will's plan, or what like the goal of things in general is. It does seem like Mikla gets so close. Like without knowing what the goal is, the way it's presented makes it seem like Mikla is the closest that we've got without actually reaching it, whatever that means. Let's do I know about the Buddhist symbology with Melania? There's something about how everyone has 5 facets, and so the daughters probably represent Melania's 5 facets, and Millicent is one of them. I'm not familiar with that. So there's lots of different schools of Buddhism. There's like Theravada and Mahayana and all these different things, and Zen, and some of them tend to be, let's say, more secular and philosophical, and some of them tend to get much more, let's say, closer to Hinduism or Shintoism, and with more sort of mysticism and cosmology closer to your standard religions, if there is such a thing. So that sounds like something from one of the more mystical schools that I'm not as familiar with. I want to say that Quilag probably covered that in a video or stream. So okay. Matt Atreides says, is Marika herself a red herring? She is presented in a way that's suspiciously similar to Lord Gwyn, so we expect her to have ulterior plans and motives. It's an interesting question, and I do think we have to be careful about bringing, like for veterans of FromSoft lore hunting, we have to be careful about bringing, like obviously Miyazaki plays with a lot of similar ideas. He plays with a palette of archetypes that are used in very similar ways throughout the games. However, we should be careful about just automatically applying assumptions from previous games onto Elden Ring. Because clearly, I'll give you an example here, actually. So back in Dark Souls 3 lore, I had a theory that Rosaria was actually Guinevere. And there are various reasons for this I won't get into, but I thought it was a good theory, and I thought there was enough to support it, even though it wasn't explicit. And then someone made the point to me that, well, look, like despite whatever the evidence is for that, there has never been anyone in the Dark Souls series which was an alias for someone else, that was secretly someone else, right? And so, and actually that's like a pretty compelling argument, because even if there's like even if you can convince yourself of something, if your theory requires a completely unprecedented narrative pattern in order to explain it, it becomes much more suspicious. So, and you know, and there's something attractive about saying, oh, this person is that person. This is the same deal with back in Dark Souls 1 lore, like with Solaire being the firstborn son of Gwyn, and everybody believed this for ages. Everybody thought it was absolutely true, and then it wasn't. So that's sort of the pattern. And going into Elden Ring, you might go, yeah, okay, so people aren't other people. But clearly there is something different about Elden Ring on that point. So I think, yes, obviously there is continuity in the way that Miyazaki thinks about these worlds, but also we have George R.R. Martin, and also there's other things, and he can come up with new ideas. So I think we should be careful. For those of us who were at one point deep into previous games lore, we should be careful about just automatically applying those things to Elden Ring. Let me just read a couple of these. Colo RPG makes the good point. As I said before, sometimes people read too deep into symbolism like alchemy and end up missing what is real. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, you know, the symbolism stuff, I feel like that's never something that you should rest an argument on. If it points you in the direction of a particular interpretation, then that's great. And you know, it is a form of like, well, now you may be closer to understanding the whole context of everything, but if you can't then support that interpretation with other ideas grounded in the actual facts of the narrative, then I feel like it doesn't hold water. So, you know, the symbolism stuff, like with the alchemy stuff, I mean, I did a whole video on alchemy, and I sort of came up with this interpretation that, like, maybe America was trying to have a perfect child. And I feel like, well, yeah, there's sort of, I don't know, I feel like that's one of many theories that work. But it's not about how much the symbolism matches with that. It's more about, you know, okay, if you have the symbolic level, now let's look at the actual facts and see if that works. And you have to kind of assess it on those facts, because it's too easy to kind of make things fit a fun idea, get attached to that idea. I'm just going to read through a couple of these. Whoa. But you were referencing the Quelaag video. That's good. I'll have to watch that one again, I think. There was also, she did a video, maybe it was the same one, on the metals, and this sort of idea of being conduits for divine energy, which I don't really remember it, but the idea has kind of stuck with me, and I'd want to think about that again. Thank you, Titan. I appreciate the comment. I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Okay. Oh, wow. So John just made a comment that it was relatively in response to something I said fairly recently, so that helps me understand that the chat isn't that far behind, so that's good. And thank you, Tor Henry Andreessen. So let's see. Let me see how much I might go on for another half hour, and then call it there, because I am going to start losing concentration, and also I want to eat some food. So actually, give me 1 second. I'm just going to start my oven up. I'll be back in literally 5 seconds. Okay, I'm back. And I'm also going to set a timer so that I don't burn anything. Okay, so where were we? So we asked the question. I was going to say we addressed the question, but I don't even think we addressed it really. We just sort of opened up other cans of worms about sort of what is the scope of destined death. Really, the question is, what happened when the Golden Order was created. And Colt, yes, I can absolutely share this text document. I will, I will do that. I'll do that at the end of the stream, just so I can make sure that, like, I don't know, people can comment and stuff. Let me see. Anyone with the link can comment. Oh, is the deathbed rune still up? Oh, whoops. Sorry, I wasn't even looking at my OBS. There we go. Sorry about that. So here is the link, and I'll post it in the in the description for this video as well, for people. So feel free to add some comments and stuff. So yeah, this is the big question to me. What happened when the Golden Order was created? Literally meaning, like, what mechanically happened? What was the effect on the world metaphysically when the Rune of Death was removed from the Elden Ring? That to me is key to unlocking the biggest part of the story. And I think it's key to understanding why all of these, like, doubles and twins and things like this exist. I think that is the most important question. So with that comes a few questions. One of those questions is, who does it apply to? Oh, whoops. Who does it apply to? What was its relationship with fate? And what is its relationship with fire? And then also, I think related to that is all the stuff with the Glowmite Queen and Malekith and what shadows are. And I mean, obviously, like, Shadow of the Erdtree implies that we are going to, I'll just pull it up here. Where is it? Let me quickly find it. There we go, a nice picture of Shadow of the Erdtree. I mean, when we look at this picture, like, clearly the idea of this is an Erdtree, a black Erdtree with, like, a gold inside, being strangled by another tree or vine, which kind of looks like the Halig tree and kind of looks like Deathroot. So this whole idea, and the fact that this is called Shadow of the Erdtree, implies that we are going to get some information on what shadows are, as in shadowbound beasts, at least some context. So that's another big part of it. And what was Malekith's role and relationship with the Glowmite Queen? What was the Glowmite Queen's relationship with Destined Death? This is all secondary to me. These are, like, the character motivations and stuff like that is secondary to kind of understanding this stuff. What happens? What is the rules? Oh, Flavor West, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. I hope we find the secrets of the universe too. Hold on, wait. Matatrady says, why would Ranni split the Elden Ring from the world if the world is already separated from the lands between and the Elden Ring itself, as you have to die in order to cross the Sea of Fog and reach it? I don't know what Ranni's doing in her ending, to be honest. So you're sort of accepting that Ranni splits the Elden Ring from the world? I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. This is a good question, and I would also question each of the assumptions baked into the question, is how I would answer that. I think the likelihood is that even though FromSoft is obviously sort of splitting themselves into multiple teams now, basically as they starting back with Dark Souls 2, and then Sekiro and Dark Souls 3 at the same time, Sekiro and Elden Ring at the same time, and now Armored Core and Elden Ring at the same time. I think the likelihood is that they still don't have a huge PR team, which means that most likely we'll get more information. Maybe this is copium, but most likely we'll get more information now that Armored Core is out, and they're probably going to dial back on the intense advertisement for it. So, hopefully we'll get more than a picture. I'm just reading the comments right now. Death burned in Ghost Flame means that they used to have different burial/death rites than Erdtree burial. Okay, so this brings me to what I was going to have as the second point, but and there's a fair amount to this, but as I am going to try and wrap it up in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to go kind of quickly. So try to follow me along with the whole idea, and then respond to the whole thing rather than kind of let's not get bogged down in too many of the details right now. So and you guys, I hope that the comment things work. So you can put them down here at the bottom if you want, or in the middle of it. Although maybe don't do that now because it might distract me. But feel free to comment up here, and you guys can even add comments and replies to each other. So this is something that you guys can access. Let's just go through this quickly. Resurrection/rebirth. So this is the death ritual spear description. It says the priests became guardians of the birds. Guardians is an important word. Through the rite of death, which also serves as an oath sworn to their distant resurrection. That's a non-restrictive clause. I will post a link to the doc again. There you go, and it will be in the description. So, non-restrictive clause, this witch. Again, there's no hard grammatical rule. It's the same as with the Elden Stars description, but the common practice is to go to the last, the most proximal noun. So that could mean death, but I think it's more likely that this is all one concept, the rite of death. And I'd have to look at the Japanese to refer to that, but usually in Japanese, when you have these, you would write this as essentially as one word. Hold on, I'm gonna drink water. Okay, so assume that it's referring to the rite of death. That means that they became guardians of the birds through this rite. And in becoming guardians of the birds through this rite, they also swore an oath. To what exactly? I'm not sure. Well, it says sworn to their distant resurrection, which is a bit strange. Now, in the Deathrite birds, in their wings, you see these monks, which I, in my previous video, connected with the bald monk. Is that their resurrection, or is their resurrection a different, are they going to be resurrected as actual monks again, like outside of the bird? Not really clear what's going on there. So let's just focus in on the rite of death. Specific thing, the Colt points out a good point here. Serves as an oath sworn to their distant resurrection. Their meaning The priests? The birds? It's not clear. I think, actually, wait, hold on. I'd have to think about that. I think this is even another layer of non-restrictive. This pronoun could apply to both, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if when you say that there, if you have to refer to the subject. I'd have to examine that again, but I think there's some ambiguity. I'd also have to look at the Japanese, I think. But let's focus on the rite of death. So we have the, what is it called? It's like the Deathbird axe, which you get from beating the Deathbird in the Weeping Peninsula. And it says the power of the rite. It's got a depiction of a Deathbird on it. The power of the rite yet lingers. A small amount of FP is restored upon slaying a foe. So, something that happens in the rite of death, even if this is even if this is like an enervated version of the rite or an enervated effect of the rite, this is something that used to happen when you performed the rite of death, is that you would absorb FP. Now, FP is governed by the mind stat, so maybe you could say that you're like absorbing some mental power, perhaps some spirit stuff from them. Okay, so that has something to do with the rite of death. What is this? This is about the Ancient Rancor spell. I think this is from that. I should have probably put in the actual items here. It says one of the spells that says, I'll just look it up really quick. Yeah, Ancient Death Rancor. So summons a horde of vengeful spirits. So those vengeful spirits, actually I should put that in there so it's clear. Okay, summons a horde of vengeful spirits that chase down foes. They are cinders of the ancient death hex, raked from the fires of ghost flame by death birds. So when you perform this ancient death hex, let's assume that this is the same thing as the death rite. It leaves behind something, and what it leaves behind are these cinders, which are vengeful spirits that chase down foes. So if you imagine that, okay, there's a death rite which is performed by burning something in ghost flame, specifically death or the dead, right? So you have someone who's dead, you burn them in ghost flame, and what happens? One thing that happens is it summons a horde of vengeful spirits. Okay, now the question is, was this always the case? Because death is not how it used to be. The death was burned in ghost flame in the time when there was no Erd Tree. So the fact that this now summons a horde of vengeful spirits doesn't necessarily mean that it used to, because we have changed something about death right now with Destined Death. What is supposed to happen is that you restore your spiritual power. This is a hypothesis, by the way. This is not fact. I'm just saying. I think this is what's supposed to happen. And instead, what is happening now when you perform this death hex / rite is that you don't absorb it. Instead, those spirits are released because they're not dead. They're not fully dead. Now, these are the same, blue skull things It's the same ghost flame is the same thing that happens when you kill a skeleton and it comes back to life. Right? It's that same ghost flame appearance. Also, when you hit Godwin's body, those little death rancor things pop out. So I think that this is an effect of the conditions of the world in which Destined Death has been removed. And instead, what's supposed to happen is something like this. Thank you. It was the sacrificial axe. God, I can't type. Now, there's still some questions there, but it would kind of, I don't know, maybe make sense as like in a pre-Erd Tree, perhaps Crucible era, you absorb parts of the dead to resurrect yourself or to have some kind of extended extra life. But that was actually the order of the world before Destined Death was removed. And now it's all messed up because Destined Death is removed. The only thing that's very confusing about this is the Ghost Flame Torch, which says that the Fallen Hawks, there was this band sent down in their search for something underground. And then what happened was they burned the bones of their fellows. I don't know why bones specifically, but it's weird because it's not spirits, right? So when you burn things in Ghost Flame, it releases spirits, but you burn the bones. So maybe the idea is like you destroy the body in order to release the spirit, and in the Death Rite, what happens is you absorb that spirit. But now it doesn't happen because the spirits aren't dead. Something like this. Instead, they're vengeful. But the weird part about all of this is doing this sealed their fate as dwellers of the underground for all eternity. And I don't really understand what that means, except in relation vaguely to my idea of the inverted world from my previous video, in which the spirit world was upside down, and maybe that has now, maybe the underworld, like the eternal cities and whatnot, is somehow closer to the spirit world, more of it's been phased with the spirit world more, something along those lines. It is somehow related to that. And so once you start burning Ghost Flame, you can't go above ground. Yes, Colt points out the important word here is fate. Yeah. Let me just read a couple of these really quick. The reason I'm going, let me just put this here so that it's clear for people. FP is governed by the mind stat. Actually, it's a little bit simpler than that. Is not HP. HP is the body. FB is the mind / spirit. Question mark. This is not a fact. But I think something along those lines is probably right. Yeah, Colt points out that Rosas has got very weird hands and feet and neck. He is kind of draconic or just sort of monster-like. And that could indicate maybe like a crucible. I mean, remember that in terms of like not applying presuppositions unduly, keep in mind always that literally at one point in time, like ancient humans had all this crazy crap on them, like scales and knots. What is it? Crucible, scale, talisman. Yeah. Said to have grown on the human body long ago. Like humans used to... Maybe this is the normal way that humans are supposed to be. Is that they grew all this crap on them. Scales and feathers and knots. So... I would say probably Rosas is from that earlier time. But I haven't really thought about him too much. John says, I want to see someone discuss what this game's contextualization is for the whole hit the reanimating skelly enemies twice to down them for real. Well, I don't know if there's a really clear reason why you can eventually stop them from coming back semi-permanently. But I think the idea that they come back has to do with this idea of Ghost Flame releasing spirits. I think the idea is like Ghost Flame burns... It's much clearer with Ghost Flame than it is with any other flame. That like what Ghost Flame does is it burns bones, potentially just dead bodies in general, but like it specifies that it burns bones, and it releases vengeful spirits in the current age. That doesn't mean that it always did, but some idea that it's like burning the body and releasing the spirit, this kind of makes sense. I think it's much clearer what like the fuel is and how it works than any of the other fires, to be honest. And so if it releases spirits and those spirits are now, or if it releases some kind of, magical essence, whatever, and in the current age what that means is it releases vengeful spirits, and that effect, that Ghost Flame power, is what you see when those skeletons reanimate. It's probably that like these are living dead bodies that are channeling vengeful spirits. Something along those lines. That's what I would say. I'm not... Okay, I didn't remember if it was if you hit Fia or if you hit Godwin. But yeah, you get those rancor Ghost Flame skulls. They come out of Godwin's body. And then Fia actually says, "Is that you, dear?" or something like that. So... Yes, and good point. If there's a necromancer with a torch, they keep on coming back no matter how many times you kill them. Matt Atreides makes a good point, and I've always thought this. American assassins had ties as Newmans, but it seems everyone believes the connection extends to Godwin's death. Wouldn't it be logical if the ties relate to the time before the Eternal City's betrayal? Yeah, I think that's absolutely... I mean, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they could continue into Godwin's death. But I think clearly the idea is that the Black Knife assassins and America came from the Eternal Cities. And there's also data to back this up in terms of like data mine stuff. So let me see if I get this right. So first of all, the Nox armor, I think in 1.0, it all said that it was robes or hoods or whatever worn by members of the Empyrean family. So that's weird. And then there's references in the code for the Silver Tears, I think, which say America lineage. So make of that what you will. Colt points out that you don't need to kill them twice, those who live in death, that is, if you use Litany of Proper Death. I've not tested this out, but does Litany of Proper Death work does it work for the skeletons where the necromancers are? I don't know if that would really indicate anything, but it would be interesting to see if that works. Yeah, both Nox and Silver Tears are called America's Lineage. Okay, I forgot that the Nox were as well. But that's a weird thing. Now, I wouldn't necessarily read into too much to that, because once you start looking at the 1.0 stuff, there's so much that is like wildly different in a way that just makes like, okay, clearly they radically changed the story throughout development. Morgott is called Elden Lord. The Helfin Steeple produces spectral flames of ruin. All the Deathbird stuff causes black flame. There's a bunch of there's a bunch of wild stuff that has changed. So you have to kind of look at the 1.0 descriptions in the context of a changing development process, which is probably inspired. I mean, Miyazaki has said in the past that he is story for the game rather than game for the story, in this meaning that, he wants to make sure that the game works and then build the story around that to fit that. So over the course of development, that story probably changes quite a bit. But other parts might not change quite a bit. And, probably all the cut stuff with Trina and Mikla is going to... Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Sorry. All that stuff with Mikla and Saint Trina is going to be probably not reappear exactly as it was, but it was probably taken out much closer to the release of Elden Ring in order to use it as material for the DLC. Seeing how pathetic Starfield turned out with the story stuff in that game made me appreciate Miyazaki's approach in a whole new way. I mean, I think this may be surprising, but actually it's in a lot of... Well, it depends on the genre, but a lot of games tend to build the narrative as a... Well, they tend to flesh out the narrative later on in development. Because you have all these inherent conflicts where it's really easy to have a conflict between, you have to have this sort of ludonarrative dissonance where things don't quite make sense with the way that they play. Especially when you have these really complicated RPGs where there's, you're sort of reading into everything. It's actually very common for games to be developed in that way, where it is kind of like the narrative layer is... Maybe there's ideas, and maybe, obviously, okay, if you build really linear missions, then you have to do that. But even then, like, there's last minute changes that can radically change the story, and it needs to work as a game first. I mean, that's sort of my view, and that's generally how people treat it. And then the story can kind of fit onto that, and it's a lot easier to change. Most story elements are easy to change, especially for something like Elden Ring, where you can just, rewrite the text description, the item description. So it's not all that uncommon. I think what Miyazaki is really, really good at is retconning things. He's really good at. Just look into some of the early builds of Dark Souls 3 for like some crazy retcons of that story. I mean, it just changed completely over the course of development, and multiple times. So he's just really good at, and I mean, it's given where that story started out, it's remarkable that it makes as much sense as it does. So I think he's just really good at retconning. Oh yeah, okay. I just want to make a couple other points, and then I think I'm gonna go eat. So I'm just gonna quickly bang these off, and then I will leave this up to you guys to comment in, and I will put this link in the description. So the idea of them being their fate being sealed as dwellers of the underground is possibly connected to the idea that the Mausoleum Knights have inflicted this curse upon themselves that ties the spirits of these knights to the land. So now I don't know why that connects with beheading themselves, because like the Fallen Hawks haven't beheaded themselves, but it does seem like that's a related concept, and that this is also related to the idea that they're keeping Destined Death at bay somehow, which is strange because Destined Death is not in the Elden Ring. So I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff about the Mausoleum Knights, the soulless demigods in there. Also, let me just put in here who is Ensha. And the Goldbone Skellies. That's just another thing to throw into that mix. And there's another pact or oath which led to people being reborn in some sense as guardians, but this is the Erdtree Guardians instead. And what this leads to is that they are becoming part tree. So is the idea that like resurrection means, first of all, is it about becoming a guardian? Is it about turning into something, like transforming? Turning into a tree, or you're being attached to the wings of a bird? Is it serving under a god? These would all be questions, but it seems like these are tied together, so there's got to be something in common. And then we have all the stuff with Renala. Reincarnation. Was Renala reincarnating herself? Was she the Snowy Crone? Is Renala Rani? This weird line from Muriel where he says, okay, she's got the amber egg, she's practicing this art of reincarnation, the forbidden rite, I would say. And then in that same speech, he's like, okay, he's saying she is now devoted to this forbidden rite of reincarnation. Hey, by the way, severing a vow, strongest of bonds, has consequences ever more dire. So first of all, vow makes me think of pact and also oath. That there's something about like your word, what you have promised yourself to, that has a kind of magical power to it. But also it's kind of implying that she is now trying to reincarnate herself or the juvenile scholars or whatever because Radigan left her, which is very strange. But actually I think there's quite a few connections between this. Something about this, Renala's reincarnation, her forbidden rite, which has to do with severing a vow, and then also the ancient pact, which leads to guardian revival, and the oath of the death rite priests being, resurrected. There is a common thread there, and I don't know what it is. A couple other concepts that are related to this. You need a larval tear, which is the core of a silver tear, and a bunch of stuff about mimics and the fact that it might tie into Marika and Radigan, and Radigan's tailoring tools and needles being related to fate. And I don't really know what to make of any of that. It's just very confusing, but clearly conceptually related. So then there's all the rebirth stuff related to rot, and as we mentioned with Melania and Millicent, ancestor spirits which absorb spirits possibly, and also a connection with the death birds. So actually let me just look up that one really quick just so you can see it. Where is it? Winged Great Horn. Where is it? I'm not seeing it. Oh, there we go. So this says, let me put it off to the side a little bit. What does this say? A unique horn in which the power of ancestral spirits fiercely dwells. This large, wing-shaped specimen is wielded as a weapon of spirit worship. In the ancestral spirit-worshipping faith, these are considered envoys' wings, made to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting. So this seems like this is referring to the death birds. The death birds. Why else would they have wings like this? Although, then we have the winged scythe, which says, according to pagan belief, white-winged maidens are said to be death's gentle envoys. I have no idea where to put that. I mean, you can just write it off as like, oh yeah, there's some other crazy belief system. But there's like angels that bring people to death. I mean, I don't know where to place that in anything. Oh, that's my timer, so I gotta go soon. Moog has wings. Well, Crucible wings, maybe? They do the Crucible Feather Talisman. It could just be related to the Crucible. Anyway, I don't know what to make of all that. There's another section down here which I only just started putting in stuff, but just about grace, because that seems to be at the center of a lot of this stuff regarding fate and death. and I'm still not really sure how to think of grace. So I put in Encyclopedia Britannica's word definition here regarding Christian theology, which is pertinent, I think. And there's a question about, well, there's several questions here. And yeah, questions about the Fingerslayer blade. So anyway, I wish I could have gone over things in a little bit more detail, but it's a pretty good coverage of the current things that I'm thinking about and possibly trying to do a video on, if I can actually put these thoughts together in a more sort of coherent, ordered way to lay it out. So that is, I think, where we're going to leave it. Let me just read the last few. Stream seems to be breaking again. Sorry about that, guys. And let me just read a couple of these. Have I seen Armored Core 6 endings? Yeah, I played through Armored Core, through all the different endings. I got everything in it. It was great. It was fun. I'm probably not going to do anything on the lore of that. I just didn't get super into it, but it was a great action game. I had lots of fun with it. Bosses you think will get in DLC? Let me read my prediction. I made a prediction on Twitter. Let me read what it is so I can put it out there on the record. I will tell you what I think is going to happen in the DLC. Here we go. Wait, where was it? Okay. I think we'll access it from Melania's boss room, obviously because of the Mikola connection, but also from a game design perspective that you don't want to put... The DLC is probably going to be end game leveled, and therefore, from a game design perspective, you want to lock it off to people until they can access it. No, that isn't necessarily true, but you don't want to put it right at the beginning, essentially. So it would make sense for it to be Melania's boss room, accessing it from Mikola's body, so that you had to defeat Melania in order to play the DLC. Possibly there could be another point of access as well. Maybe pull a sort of Dark Souls 3 where you access one DLC from one location and it leads into the next DLC, because they did apparently design this as two and turned it into one. So it could be something like that where you access one location and it leads into the next, or later on you can access the second location. I think there's going to be a creepy, disheveled guy with an amazing voice actor that greets us once we go to this other world. I think at some point in the DLC, you're going to get some sort of weird, upside-down faced amphibian, maybe frog or something like that. Some weird creature like that. That just makes sense. Maybe a crustacean amphibian, something watery with like an upside down face, something along those lines. And that is more based on my previous videos speculation, so that's where I'll really put my my money where my mouth is. I think you are going to fight the shadow of the Erd Tree, and it's going to turn out to be some snake monster. Possibly also a person at the same time. And I think that no one is going to agree on exactly where or when or what the DLC's world is. I think people are going to argue lots of different things about whether it's a memory or the past or a spirit world or a world outside of time or a dream or any of these things. I think it isn't going to be explicit at all, and everybody's going to be arguing about it. And my reason for thinking so is because it's essentially going to be somewhere in between all of those, or kind of all of them at once. That is my list of predictions for the DLC. I also think it's going to be way bigger than anyone's expecting. And will probably recontextualize everyone's opinion of Elden Ring as a whole in a positive direction, because it will eventually feel like that is the whole game, is the combination of the base game and the DLC. So that's where I'm thinking it will go. I think there will also be some weird people that are probably similar but different to people that we already know in the base game. So, like, I don't know if we're gonna meet Mikola, but we might meet someone, maybe like a young girl who isn't Saint Trina, but is kind of like Mikola. Something along those lines, just like a weird, just more to confuse us, essentially. Couple more questions. Crunchy, do you think the Formless Mother has a higher role in the lore? Melania's blooming, Omen's thorns, seems like she's connected to many things via the Crucible. Yeah, I covered a bit of this in my Crucible video, and also connections to the Frenzied Flame. A lot of connections there. Nothing explicit, but it seems like it may be the case. Yeah, I mean, clearly she's important, but it's not really clear what she is. So yeah, I don't know if, like, in the grand cosmology of the universe, if she's more or less important than Rot, or possibly, you know, a death outer god, if that is what it is, if there is such a thing. I'd say my gut instinct is that the really key god to understand would be the Fel god, more than any of these outer gods. That one, I think, would unlock more by understanding, because fire is such a central element of this, and the fight with the fire giant, and the fact that Marika is thought to have slain the Fel god, but clearly it still exists in the fire giant, indicates something about the role of death and fire, and also the idea of having one eye and how that might relate to Saint Trina, Saint Trina's depiction having one eye. So yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there and go get something to eat. So I really appreciate you guys stopping by, and I appreciate you putting up with all the stream problems. I promise I will figure out what the issue is there and try to work it out by next time so that we don't have to deal with it. I honestly, I thought I had it set up right, and I finally have, like, great hardware to work on instead of my old MacBook, which I was streaming off of before. And for some reason it's much worse, so that sucks, and I don't know why. So I'll try to figure that out, and apologize for that. And next time, hopefully it'll work a lot better. So once again, I will share this document in the chat, and I will post it in the description for this video. And feel free to comment in it. It should be open to comment, so comment whenever you want. And try to address some of these questions if you can, or bring in other things to think about. So anyway, appreciate you guys stopping by. Thank you very much, and take care.